Well, what a wonderful time to be gathering two really important businesswomen. You're both steeped in the world of technology. You built extraordinary success building businesses, building communities, building efforts to really now change the world in which we live for good in terms of social justice, in terms of mental health. So wonderful, Ursula and Arianna, to have you here with us. Talk at this moment, Ursula, first and foremost, about what this moment means for you. This moment when we are looking at a time to hope, to rebuild from what is a global pandemic, an economic crisis, what is also turning out to be a movement, a global movement for social injustice, as we really start to dissect the inequality that's still upon us, whichever country you live in fact. What does this moment mean for you?
Yeah, this has been a really difficult time it started out as a very difficult time that has transitioned into a time of amazing hopefulness on my part. And it's interesting how I got here, and I'm happy that I've gotten here. So we are in a very difficult situation in the world. I'm going to not speak about the world right now, I'm going to speak about the US and just multiply that to every country in the world, right? So I don't have to keep saying the world. The United States right now is essentially divided. And it's divided around and the question at the division point is, what kind of country do we want to be? What kind of hope what kind of future do we want to try to build towards? What kind of possibilities are out there? And there are forces in our country today that are trying to have a discussion about a smaller, less inclusive world, or US. And unfortunately, we have already built a whole nation around a larger, more inclusive path. And unfortunately, it's kind of like an earthquake, having these two rocks kind of move and shift. What's happened in the last 7 months is that we've had a pandemic, which pushed on the basic structure of the country on the backs of the least able to bear the weight. So the poorest people are being hit the hardest. The least healthy are being hit the hardest. People have the worst jobs, pushing gurneys down the hallway, checking people out of the Whole Foods or whatever line that you're in. These people have become essential workers. You better show up. Not only the docs and the nurses, it's literally the guy who cleans the street. All of these people who literally yesterday, we didn't even know they existed. We didn't want to pay any attention to them, and we damn sure didn't want to pay them a living wage for New York. Now they are vital. That whole thing came to bear under this pandemic. We have a whole bunch of rhetoric in the United States, but around the world, from our government leadership that literally gives no hope. That's a very difficult set of discussions around who belongs and who doesn't belong, around just what good looks like. And then we have crime being committed in our streets by our protect and serve individuals, by our police. Now, this has happened before. Two of these individual things happened before: bad leadership at the government level and crime by the caregivers and the peace givers. The thing that laid on top of that was this pandemic. And what has happened is people have now stepped back, and instead of this being a Black Lives issue only, instead of this being a Hispanic issue only or a Me Too issue only for women, everybody's looking up and saying, this is not right. It's not balanced, it's not fair, it's not reasonable. So when I went to my 2 marches here in London, I was amazed. There were less Black people marching than there were everything else. So it became a movement not of only Black lives, which would have been important enough, but it became a movement of people who have hope for the future, who are trying to build a better world, who are trying to actually have equality, who had to try to have social justice, to try to have fairness. And those discussions are now happening. And one last point, the thing that happened miraculously during this time as well is that business finally said, maybe we should be involved here. Maybe we shouldn't wait till we are mandated to do this. Maybe we shouldn't wait for some target. Maybe we shouldn't stay in our lane only of shareholder return. Maybe we have a voice and something to do around social justice, around policing, around Black lives, around women. Maybe we have more to do here. And for the first time, amazing, that's why I'm a little bit more hopeful. For the first time, we're having real conversations as business leaders about not only what happens in our boardrooms and in our factories, but what happens when our employees walk out of those factories. What happens when our employees have to go to schools or have to walk through the street? What responsibility do I as a business have to actually contribute to a better world versus make a whole lot of money and distribute it to the, it's been hopeful. So as I say, this is a strange way to put it, but George Floyd, who nobody knew, I didn't know him individually, this man may actually be, at the tip of his name will be a transformation of how society interacts with, how we interact with ourselves. That may be the juxtaposition point, the jump off point where we start to have a lot of different dialogues. It's happening. I'm hoping that we can sustain it and it changes the world. It changes the way that we work.
Arianna, do you see this holistic moment, this when you're talking to executives, to businesses, that they're now finally seeing that they need to look at their employees as a whole and that they can now start to rebuild, and looking in that moment for an opportunity to see the silver lining amid what are enormous clouds of pandemic, of social strife?
Absolutely. I really loved what Ursula said and completely agree. And I love, Ursula, that you started with hope, because it is truly an amazing moment when you have millions of people protesting about issues that we knew. It's not like this was the first time we knew about the racial injustice or the people living without a living wage. But I think this point of transformation that Ursula is talking about is real. In the past, pre-pandemic, we all knew that there were dangerous growing inequalities in our society. I mean, I think probably you, Caroline, Ursula, and I, between us, have been to dozens of conferences about inclusive capitalism and addressing growing inequalities, but it was left at the conference level. Nothing really fundamental changed. We just had a lot of discussions. And now, suddenly, as Ursula said, we are finding the same thing at Thrive. We work with dozens of multinational companies, and executives are truly engaged. They want to see fundamental changes, both within their companies around diversity, inclusion, belonging, and also in terms of what are their responsibilities. That it's not, as Ursula said, about staying in their lane and just about shareholder returns. And again, this is something we've talked a lot about. It's not like we haven't talked a lot about stakeholder capitalism and triple bottom line and all that pre-pandemic. The fundamental shift now is that we have moved from rhetoric to action. Now, whether this action will be sustained and meaningful depends on all of us. And that's what I love about the theme of Good Era, that we can't kind of delegate that responsibility to business leaders or social activists. Each one of us has to kind of look into the mirror, look in the mirror and find the leader inside us. This is the moment when social transformation demands that of each one of us. And whatever form it takes for each one of us, whatever gifts and talents we have to contribute, it means our lives can not just be about our own lives, but also doing something to make this country. Ursula focused on the US. Okay, this country, was always on this journey towards a more perfect union. And that was always part of who we were. So now we just need to turn it into reality. And also because of what's happened politically, because of so much abdication in political leadership, business people are recognizing that they can truly be a platform for change. And they are looking at each other. And it's not just about philanthropic contributions anymore.
Yeah.
It's about fundamental systemic changes. So I, too, am extremely optimistic, provided each one of us does our part, however small. At Thrive, we talk about micro steps. It doesn't matter how small our contribution is, but becoming part of the whole. And doing something that goes beyond our own small circle, expanding our circle of concern has always been the way we also evolve in our humanity.
Absolutely.
Ursula, from that perspective, how do you ensure that this moment to rebuild and this moment of building communities, as Moderator is and wants it to be a people-led movement, how do you ensure that the leaders of business and as you were at Xerox and chair at Veon, how do you ensure that people have authenticity when they're leading the change in the business and actually empower the employees below them?
Right. Part of this is Arianna said a little bit about it, it's engagement, right? So part of what's going to be required is that we who have a pulpit, a voice or whatever, have to literally stay on it. We can't go back home and say, okay, we did our piece. No, the way that I ensure is I am engaged. I am actively engaged. I love Moderator because it takes the save a penny every day, you double your earnings and eventually you'll be literally start small, go big, right? I love that kind of theory because the world doesn't change from only big. It has to be small and grow. That you have to start at the top, go to businesses. I speak to many of them on a daily basis around diversity, equity, inclusion, around what does that really mean? What does it mean to be a triple bottom line leader? How do you do that? How do you get involved with policing? How do you get involved with education? So it literally is through involvement. Second thing I think we're going to have to do is really start to measure. We're not quite there yet, but I learned a long time ago that if you don't measure things, it's almost like a game. So we're going to have to start to get to the point where we pick the right measures. I don't think we're quite there yet. Pick the right measures and start literally doing a leaderboard. How are you doing? You're doing well? You're not doing well. So measuring and communicating people who are doing very well. Forget about the people who are not doing well. Communicating to people who are doing really well in progress around sustainability, around diversity, around inclusion, around making a more perfect union. And the third thing is we absolutely have to go back to basics in things like education and healthcare. These are two places where business has to help, governments have to help, but we are falling so short of preparing the next 7 billion people, right? So every day we give birth to some number of people. We have to prepare them better to be citizens of the world. And by the way, in the last 100 years or so, we've been falling behind in both of these areas. In the United States, it's been embarrassing how far we've fallen behind. But we have to actually prepare. So number one, stay engaged as an individual. I keep telling my kids, nobody else is going to do this but us. You have to assume that, I don't care if nobody does anything else, we have to act. Number two, we have to start measuring and seeing if we're making progress. And three, we have to kind of go back to the beginning and make sure that we prepare the next generation of the world to be good citizens of the world. Next generation of Americans to be good citizens of America, of New Zealand. We have to prepare the world to be better citizens. They have to be able to read and write, comprehend complex thoughts. They have to be able to understand how the world works. We have to do better at this. They have to have safety and good health care as well. So,
Ursula, you're currently sort of shrouded in light by what you're saying, but also what's happening in your room. I was wondering if you could pull the curtain just a little bit so the sun doesn't bathe you in its glory as you talk to us.
And this is the situation in London, if you can believe that.
Although it looks kind of amazing, she looks even more like a prophetess.
Exactly. bathed in light.
On her.
And it's moving because it's 5 o'clock here, so the sun is obviously moving around the room. But
Arianna, your perspective from focusing on the person right now, the next generation, the employee as well. And this is an extraordinary moment because not only are we having to tackle such inherently personal feelings and people movements that stir emotion, but they're trying to do this from their own home without that connection that they get by going into the office, by meeting up with their friends. Can you talk to us about the importance that businesses can play, and indeed volunteering, as Moderator can give to us and show, of giving back right now, and how much that can help people's well-being, and how much you're focused on the mental state of mind right now?
Well, first of all, Caroline, it's really important to look at all the science that shows that when we give, we are also the recipient. We have so much data about the impact it has on our own well-being, on our own sense of abundance about life. If you think of it, whenever we are doing things for ourselves, trying to meet our goals, succeed, etc., in some sense, we are operating from lack, like we're trying to get something we don't have. Whenever we're giving, we're operating from abundance. We're giving from our overflow. And that has an incredibly expansive effect on us, which is particularly important during this mental health crisis, when people are really overwhelmed with stress, anxiety about the future, uncertainty. So the more we can also integrate giving to someone else, whatever that form that takes, including identifying what our skills are. It could be cooking, it could be singing, it could be doing accounting, and using them to help others. It has an amazing, and to Ursula's point, measurable impact on how we feel, on our well-being, both our physical health and our mental health. And therefore, as a business, it has a real impact on the business, because businesses now are looking at the data and are seeing that when employees are stressed out and anxious, their productivity goes down. We have an amazing new study from Yale that when an employee or any human being is stressed, the prefrontal cortex of the brain weakens. And that's the place from which we make decisions, we act in the world, and the primitive part of the brain takes over. In fact, this is also verified by Google searches. Google searches for how can I get my brain to focus are up 300%. So employers are really recognizing the importance of helping their employees deal with the stress and anxiety of these times. Again, we've always talked about removing the stigma of addressing mental health problems in business pre-pandemic, but now this is no longer a nice to have. It's not just a nice benefit for employers to give their employees. It's imperative if they want a thriving business. So that's really the change. The acceleration of what needs to happen is overwhelming. And the other thing that's so important, that we have done a lot of studies at Thrive, is when you're engaged in giving, you put your own problems in perspective.
Yes.
You know, every human being has problems. There's nobody who doesn't. But when you actually are giving and you see the overwhelming problems and pain that people are dealing with, it's much harder to worry about a lot of our problems, which are, by comparison, paling into insignificance. And that's not something intellectual. It just happens, really. And I'm actually, to go back to Ursula's point about education, I'm a big believer that volunteering needs to be part of education, that students from the time they're in elementary school need to make that part of their lives, the way they go to visit museums and parks and Disneyland, whether it's through their families or their schools, they need to make volunteering, giving part of their own education. I know that when you know, one of my daughters got involved in drugs, and part of her rehab was mandated by her mother, was to go volunteer in South Central LA, where we were living at the time in LA. And she went to a place called home. And at the end of her volunteering day, they had a circle where they all sat down. There were kids from the community, older people, and they all forgave someone. And when her time came, she forgave a girlfriend who had told her something mean. And then the person next to her, a young boy, said, "I forgive my father for killing my mother." So suddenly, she was confronted with the reality of people's lives. And when she came home, it had a big transformational impact on her about all the things that she allowed herself to be upset over. Mm. And, all of us as parents and educators, we say that to our children. But saying it is nowhere near as powerful as letting them experience the pain that exists in the world and accepting our responsibility to do something about it.
Ursula, how can a business leader teach themselves empathy at this moment? You, in this moment of social strife and focus on justice and then desire for equality, you've lived and breathed this all your life. You are a person of color who has been confronted by some of the stigmas and the situations that many now are becoming aware of in their moment of being educated by people such as yourself. I've interviewed other business leaders who've come from Xerox, people of color who have risen through the ranks and now head up marketing for UPS, for example. They're people that you've helped guide through the ranks because you were a person of color yourself. How do you talk to those who are leading, unfortunately, the other 450 US businesses who are not people of color to ensure that they are empathetic in this moment, not only for the focus on equality, but the focus for mental health and also physical health as we confront this pandemic?
One thing is patience. One of the things in the beginning of this tirade of, just questions, I was impatient, and I realized that not everybody has the same set of experiences, and not everybody has the same perspective, right? That I have, and not me to them either. I think that this is not something that you teach. This is not something that you can teach in short term. If they don't have it by now, I think that we're going to find out that they're not going to be great leaders for the future, so they won't be there. This is not something that you turn on today. Oh my God, now I have to think about equity. I think what we have to do is re-spark the interest of the people who already have it, right? Most of the business leaders that I'm dealing with these are people who I would be friends with, if you know what I mean. I would quote unquote hang out with them because they have the right fundamental DNA. There are some people who don't. I fortunately don't have to deal with them, and you just have to let them go and the cycle will catch up with them. What I'm generally doing is trying to expand the view of fundamentally good people who actually have been, over many, many, many years, they've been excluded from challenge. They have, I always say they have lived grace lives. And what we're trying to do is actually allow them to see, it's a little bit of Arianna's example, allow them to see that there are worthy people in the world who don't have graced lives. And the difference between them and that person is a set of opportunities, a little bit of help from somewhere else, a little bit of help in the classroom, a little bit of help in training, a little bit of help in giving them a chance. That's where, fortunately, most of my energies have been going to fundamentally good people, which thank goodness a lot of the CEOs are fundamentally good people who have just been over many, many years been hardened or excluded from understanding how the rest of the world really lives. So now what we have to do is show them how the rest of the world really lives. This is something that started when I first started to really pay a lot of attention to the Me Too thing. I mean, I'm a Me Too person. And it's interesting how we became comfortable with something that, and I don't know if you watched the movie, people said, yeah, we knew this. Men, we knew this was happening. And what happens is we kind of get out, we force ourselves to believe that that's okay. What we're now doing is waking up in all of us a level of indignation about some what I call basic rights that we have. In the indignation that some people just don't have that. And that's what it is. It's not about taking I can name probably 10 who you couldn't teach anything to. I'm not spending a lot of time with those guys. It's literally people who are fundamentally good. They had a little bit of help in their lives, and they basically have to give a little bit of help. Something that Arianna said that's really interesting. My son went to a Jesuit high school in McQuaid, in Rochester, and the motto of the school for Jesuits in general is called Men for Others. That's what the Men for Others. I remember when I was thinking of where we were going to send my son to school, the entire reason for picking that school was the motto, Men for Others. We are raising these people into adulthood so that they can serve others, not be subservient to others. That's not what I'm talking about. But serve. Part of what you do in your life, this is how we were all raised. You go to church, you put some money in the collection box, not because you're going to get smacked upside your head, because we know people need help. And this whole thing has kind of changed a little bit. It's become, obviously, not totally, but it's become kind of out of phase, right? Not good, not a thing that we spend a lot of time on. And businesses have made this programmatic. We give $1 million to this, $1 million to that, and we kind of pulled our employees away from that type of service. What Moderator allows, that's one of the reasons why I loved it when I heard it. It's about every 800 million people, work around the world in these, every one of them can spend an hour a week, right? Think about how much you could do, how much help you could do. They're either generally well educated, they're generally well funded, so they earn reasonable amounts of money. Help, get into a school, help, build a little house, help build a house, give hope to people who are out there. This is not turning into a mamby-pamby nation. This is turning into a good nation, a good world where we see somebody who needs help. We have a little bit of extra here. They have a little hole. We put it together. We fill the hole with the extra. Everything is fine. That's how we were raised. And we have to just get back to this and remind ourselves that we are great on the backs of people who came before us, right? So why can't we be the back for somebody to be great on?
Arianna, it's exactly that moment of trying to find a way to give back. And you cited how the Google searches are currently showing 300% uptick in how we can be more productive. But Abhishek, of course, who leads Moderator, was reminding me there's an 800% uptick in people searching for volunteering right now. There is a desire in this moment of social upheaval to give back and to hopefully find that mental well-being in giving to others. How do you think technology can help with that at the moment? How do you think we can empower people within a moment where we have to stay socially distanced, but can be empowered to help in some way?
Oh, tremendously. Technology can help tremendously augment our humanity. It sounds like a paradox, but I think what Moderator is doing is like using technology to augment our humanity. And we find, at Thrive, we've launched a behavior change product. And it has 4 journeys. And the 4th journey is about connection. And connection is about giving. And we found that as we put the journeys together, the first journey is recharge, to avoid burnout. And it's connected to giving. When we are burnt out, we are less empathetic. Mm-hmm. And we move into survival. We move into fight or flight. We just really can't care for anyone else because we're just trying to survive. So when we prioritize also our own well-being, our own sleep, time to recharge during the day, etc., it affects our giving. We are all one interconnected human being. So we try to capture that in our tech product. And the reason we created a tech product rather than just workshops or webinars like we're doing now, which is fantastic, is in order to scale and reach millions of people around the world, you need technology. Mm-hmm. And the other journey is fuel, because what we eat and how much we move also affects how we feel about ourselves, how healthy we are, how mentally healthy, and that affects our capacity to give. And the third journey is focus. You know, the negative side of technology is that it can be full of distractions. You know, we are all like constantly interrupted by endless notifications. And, you know, our micro step here is turn off notifications. I have turned off all notifications that are general. If I want to get news, I can go to Bloomberg, Caroline, and see what's the latest news you have there. But I will pick the time. Mm-hmm. I don't want to give a blanket approval to anybody to interrupt what I'm doing with whatever they consider an important notification. So we need to use technology for good, but also to set boundaries to our use of technology, so that we can be the most effective we can be and have the time and the energy to give.
I think this is so important. I think, Arianna, what you said is so important. I love the phrase technology to augment our humanity. It is.
Sure, Ursula, you can have it.
Yeah, I wrote it down. I'm keeping it. It is. It's so fundamental. It's so basic. If you think about what this time has taught us, right? This time has taught us that we have to learn how to live with ourselves. We have to learn how to live with ourselves. We have to learn how to cook for us. We have to learn how to keep ourselves going. Good news, a lot of us were able to pull some things that we have learned from the past back, so we're still thriving, we're still going. The other thing it taught us was that we have to control technology. I tell you, I had to learn this because I literally could be going, we all could be, from the time that we wake up until 8 hours after we would normally close the business day, because we've removed the barriers of interruption. We have to put them back in, put the barriers back up, because literally we have to use this technology we have, every screen sharing thing that we have, for our lives, not for the technology just because it exists. We have to use it to make ourselves and the world better. And I think the technology in a world like today it's an amazing enabler for good, but we have to control it. We have to it doesn't have its own brain and tell us what, we have to tell it what to do. We are connecting. We're in 4 different places in the world, right? Or 3 different places in the world, 4 with Abhishek. And he has 4,000 people that are all, and we are able to communicate effectively and share hints and tips for a better world. This is what technology, and by the way, we can also share hints and tips for a not so better world. Let's hope that we keep doing the good world thing. Technology is unavoidable. It's at the core of everything. We have to shape it to make our lives and the world better. And, back to where I started, this is an amazing time. This is an amazing time. It's, instead of it being out of our control, I feel more like technology, the future, it's more in our control. And all we got to do is keep, it's going to be hard. It's going to take years and years and years and years and years to kind of fix some of the mess. But that's part of the fun, right? The fun is a challenge. Let's start working to make it better. Let's measure to see if we're making progress. Let's engage, and let's see if we can make the world a better place. I think we can do that. By the way, it needs it, and we can do it.
So are you, overall, do you think, I'm going to ask you, Ursula, with a USA written on your T-shirt, but sat in London, are you at a moment where you're hopeful for the country in which you usually live?
I am more hopeful than I have been in 3 years. I am more hopeful than I have been in 3 years. It was a difficult time over the last 3.5 years to get myself convinced that I wanted to be a part of what America wanted to be. That's one of the reasons why I moved, right? And I think that what happens is that we so herald and speak about a lot of the what I call the edge voices. These, we see them in the news a lot. We hear about them, these edge voices of hate, of discontent, of exclusion, of inequity, of you name it, that you hear them so much that you think that's everybody in America. That must be America. I think that what has happened in the last couple of months is that 6 months or so is that I'm hearing more of the non-edge voices, the average guy who says, no, I want a good life, and I want you to have, I don't want a good life that smashes your life. I want a good life. I want you to have a good life with you. So I'm starting to hear more hopeful signs about what I call a truly inclusive society, where we will never, in my lifetime, we will not make it perfect. But I want to say that in the rest of my life that we try every day to make it better. There was a time when I didn't think that's where we were headed, that we were literally headed towards, I can be good. The only way I can be good is to take something from you, take something from somebody else. I think we're starting to have a dialogue that says that's probably not necessary. We can actually be great capitalists. We can be great, a great meritocracy, but that meritocracy doesn't mean that we have a whole swath of society, more than 50% of it, that lives in a way that would be disgraceful to see. And I think that we are starting to learn how to actually have a good conversation about that. We're starting to learn how to at least have a conversation about race. Because I tell you, this is one that's really, I chuckle a lot about how difficult this is. It's harder than having a conversation about sex. You can have, the sex conversation happens relatively easy. The race conversation, it's an amazing thing. People just we don't know how to do it. We don't feel comfortable talking about it. It becomes personal almost immediately. And white Americans, or non-brown and black Americans, and non-brown and black people around the world are going to start to have to become more comfortable having a conversation about the fact that there is this thing called race, even though people say that there isn't, but there is this thing called race. And unfortunately, it has negatively affected society, the way that we've been playing out this thing called race, and we have to probably adjust. I think this is a conversation that is good to have. It's good to have. There's this thing called gender, believe it or not, and I say this all the time. We've structured the world around a male gender, and we've actually structured it in such a way to be a female is a demerit. It's a demerit. You can't run this is the way that they can't run as fast. You have to take time off from work to have children. Imagine that we have a discussion like you have to take time off from work to recreate the human race. Yeah, probably you have to do that. That's a good thing, isn't it? Isn't that, we should be actually giving them a whole bunch of money to go do this. So I think we're starting to become more rational about resetting the baseline of our conversations. Our conversations have been conversations that have been mandated and dictated by white, male, supreme beings, and that supreme being structure is so pervasive and so comfortable in everything that everybody has to explain how they fit into that structure, versus that's not the way it should be. We all fit into the structure. We just have to we don't have to justify ourselves there. Women don't have to prove that they can work as hard as the men. African Americans and brown and black people in the world don't have to prove that they're worthy of. That's where we've been, right? Back to show me that you deserve this. I think we have to move beyond that and just reset. It's going to take a long time. Right? This is not going to happen tomorrow. We have to reset and say, okay, we're all here together. We're not going anywhere. So let's figure out a way to live a better way. Instead of men for others, I call it people for others. Right? Not only for ourselves.
And people for others outside of the borders in which we currently live and Absolutely. The world in which because this is what's interesting also about Good Era is that, founded by someone who's originally Indian, you sit there in London, I sit here in the East Coast, and Arianna, you sit on the West Coast of Greek heritage. How are you looking at that we can overcome some of the geopolitical issues that we currently confront, where people are becoming more isolation as the ways and means of moving forward rather than a global world where we have international businesses and international volunteer groups that can cross borders to help those that perhaps aren't sat on the same coast as them?
Yes.
Well, actually, I'm even more optimistic than Ursula, because I believe that when the time comes for fundamental change, it happens faster than we think. I mean, just look at marriage equality, for example. We went from having senior Democrats like Obama, opposing it, to it being so absolutely taken for granted that we can't even imagine that it wasn't that long ago that it was really controversial. Mm-hmm. So I believe we're at this moment, and the pandemic has accelerated all this change, and that's really how social change happens. I love the concept of critical mass, and that's what makes me so optimistic, that until you have a critical mass, change seems so impossible. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly when you get a critical mass of people, and that's why getting enough people to volunteer and get involved makes a difference, because you don't know if you're going to be the one person who gets us to critical mass. And yes, critical mass is never as many people as we think. But for me, it's a scientific concept from chemistry that makes me incredibly optimistic about social change. And also, we talked about technology. Let's also talk about ancient wisdom. If we want to bring the world together, what unites us is that every spiritual and philosophical tradition, whether it's the Jesuits, the Stoics, the Bhagavad Gita in India, Zen in Japan, the Tao in China, everything tells us the same thing, that we all have that place of strength, wisdom, and peace in us, and that's the place that unites us as human beings, whatever our race, our religion, our gender and sexual orientation. So connecting to that place in us is essential if we're going to connect to that place in everyone else around the world, instead of seeing human beings like other and dehumanize them, which is what happened in the case of George Floyd and the policeman. When you don't recognize the interconnectedness, the extreme is to dehumanize specific sections of the population. And once you dehumanize them, there are no limits to what you're going to do.
We've proven that as a society.
So I just feel not in any way complacent, but incredibly optimistic that the pandemic has been a crucible, a time of incredible trial, incredible losses of loved ones, of jobs. I'm not minimizing the incredible cost of the pandemic. But at the same time, it's been a time when we've looked at our lives and looked at what really matters. Is it just about money and status? Or are there other values that we have neglected? And it's really this distinction between eulogy values and resume values. Yes. And volunteering is about our eulogy values. What do we want to be remembered by? What do we want our legacy to be? And our resume values are always, of course, about climbing the ladder faster and faster at whatever cost to ourselves, our health, our loved ones, and our communities. And putting our community at the center now is something which we're seeing more and more, including among businesses. We are working with Walmart, for example, at Thrive, not just to help Walmart associates in the stores, but help communities. Like we are now in Muskegon, Michigan, working with the whole community. And it's incredibly rewarding to see how we can help people achieve better health outcomes through small behavioral changes. But again, that combination of health and education has not really happened. A lot of people don't know, hey, sleep is really important for your physical health and your mental health. So these are again, the micro steps that can help us accelerate these changes and that make the connections. And I believe that volunteering is like a glue that brings all these connections together. So at Thrive, we're very excited to be working with Goodera to give opportunities to our Thrive employees and also to work to bring it to many of the companies we're working with.
That is a perfect way to sort of make our conversation so circular, because we began this talking about what this conversation is about, rebuilding communities one volunteer at a time. And you surmise it so well, Arianna. I want both of you to surmise, if you can, because I know that they're going to be taking this collective viewpoint and putting it forward at Goodera. If you can, for us, Ursula first, put what volunteering means for you in just 3 words, if that's possible.
Global progress. 2 words. Global progress.
And Arianna, how do you surmise volunteering in 3 words or less?
So I think, first of all, transformation. Volunteering can be transformational for individuals, for communities, for our world. The other word is perspective. I think it's so important for us to gain perspective about our own problems compared to problems of millions of others. And the final word, which is my favorite word in the English language, is grace. You know, there is kind of grace that descends on us when we expand the boundaries of our concerns to include others, you know, and we can move from struggle, which is how often we envision our own daily lives, to grace, where we feel part of something larger than ourselves.
I love the word grace. It's a great word. Great word.
And also, as we pass the ball on now from this conversation onto what is, I think, going to be the launching of Karma Hub, I'm interested in, Ursula, your perspective of how much technology and something like, as they surmise it, an Airbnb for volunteering, but in particular, the world's largest repository for virtual volunteering opportunities, how important that is right now.
7 billion people, 7-point-something billion people in the world. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of them connected, a large percentage of them connected through technology. We are in a situation right now where that's the best way for us to be connected. It's the safest way for us to be connected, literally to keep a distance. And imagine a platform. How could you connect something, a problem with a solution so perfectly? And that's what happened we are isolated in our homes, even if we get out for walks. We have skills and things to give. And we have people who need those things. And we have what Goodera does, and what this platform does, what the hub does, is it allows our the part of the grace of our nature to be able to reach somebody who needs that, and vice versa, right? It helps us to get it as well. So it's timing couldn't be better. Even when we can get back together, still, I mean, we need to teach somebody in India something about calculus, or in the cities of the United States about cooking, or literally, this is a great time for us to learn to embed, stabilize, and then grow a connection of people who naturally wouldn't see each other, and people who have and people who need. And everybody has, as Arianna says, everybody needs. Everybody has something and everybody needs something. And if we can use this technology to augment our humanity, that's what Goodera is about. It's a technology platform to augment our humanity. Perfect. And timing couldn't be better.
And Arianna, your perspective on technology as a force for volunteering?
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with Ursula. And I was just thinking, it's funny that this has been such a wonderful conversation, and I feel so close to you, Caroline, and to Ursula, even though we are all miles away.
Miles away, yeah.
And I was thinking, you know, Ursula and I spent many hours sitting next to each other at Uber board meetings, and I didn't feel as close to her as I feel.
Really interesting. It's not interesting. It's really interesting because it's such a great point, right? It's such a great point that this is a purposeful conversation, right? And we are in 2D. And sometimes when we're in 3D, basically we take for granted. We take all the connections for granted. You just come in and you do your work and you leave. And I think that the great part about technology is, if you don't let it get too far out of control, is that you can have purposeful conversations that are good and connections that are really good and fun.
And fun.
Yeah.
I've had so much
Thank
fun,
you so much.
but also so much inspiration taken from the two of you. Thank you both for volunteering so much of your time and your dedication, your insights to what is going to be a huge audience dissecting this. And thank you for both of your grace today.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful spending time with you.
It's wonderful. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, both.
Take care.